A world untouched by man for over 3 centuries. Nature has reclaimed the planet, with buildings vanishing due to decay and erosion. All of the strides that mankind had made, gone in the blink of an eye. Humanity remains in a petrified state, turned to stone, until the cracks begin to form. Within the pages of Dr. Stone, the wonderful manga created by Riichiro Inagaki and Boichi, the readers are treated to a tale unlike many of its contemporaries. Dr. Stone begins with a bang, as the human race has succumbed to a mysterious petrification, frozen still as the world revolves. As the story continues, there is a constant feeling of mystery and awe as Senku and the crew he forms try to find their way in a world untouched by man for centuries, as well as uncover how it all went down. As the plot carries forward, the charm and mysticism of Dr. Stone only grow. The antagonistic forces that Senku and his ragtag group face off with echo the eras of humanity, clashing with enemies that represent the past, present, and eventual future of the human race. Tsukasa and the treacherous foes of Treasure Island remind the readers of a time long forgotten. Dr. Zeno and his henchmen, armed with modern knowledge and technology, look no different than people of current time. And lastly, the final boss of the Y-Man, which perfectly embodies the future that humanity has yet to see. Aside from the challenges of facing those who oppose them, Senku's crew also has to face off with a world that has undergone vast changes. The stone world itself is an opponent, with all of previous civilization having been erased. Human history as a whole has vanished. No modern commodities are there, so it's up to Senku to return the world to how it was. The theme of humanity pushing forward and striving in the face of these challenges is handled spectacularly in Dr. Stone. And not just with Senku, but his friends and foes who must also make decisions and act according to their surroundings. The most obvious and brilliant part of Dr. Stone is one that I'm sure many of you are already aware of. In a magazine full of fantastic feats of strength and machismo, Dr. Stone sets itself apart through use of science. With science acting as the driving force, the series covers grounds in a way that has not commonly been seen within fiction, let alone shown in manga. The science of Dr. Stone manages to remain interesting due to how it is implemented, with Senku explaining the bits that are needed to understand what is happening without going overboard and boring the audience. In addition to this, the science is also largely all within reason, which makes for some interesting approaches for solutions. The science enhances the story, while also making for a captivating read. The experience Dr. Stone provides is packed with excitement, intrigue, and enough science to impress even the most scholarly of readers. It is without a doubt one of the greatest manga to ever come out of Shonen Jump. So get excited as we look at the brilliance of Dr. Stone. Throughout the time humanity spent on Earth, it evolved rapidly in terms of scientific advancement. It's apparent even now with technology developing right before the modern human's eyes. In the span of 10 years or so, cell phones went from BlackBerry to iPhones, with capacity for immense storage and impressive displays. Miniature computers the size of your palm compared to the blocky phones of days past. For Dr. Stone, a story that centers itself around the essence of science and humanity, it's no surprise the threats that Senku faces evolve as well. Paralleling the different eras of human civilization, these foes match the past, present, and future of human potential and scientific thought. They capture this through multiple aspects such as their basic principles, appearance, and even their methods of attack. Beginning with the first opponent that Senku must face is the strongest high school primate, Tsukasa Shishio. Tsukasa being one of the first people to be freed from the petrification, he went from an ally who swore to protect Senku and Taiju to a staunch opponent of them, even going as far as creating an entire faction of people to stand with him. How things dissolved between the two began as a difference in ideals, both coming from the modern age with opposite ideas on how to progress the world. Senku supporting the idea that with his revival fluid and knowledge of science, he will return the world to the way it was, with Tsukasa opposing this, as he knows the harsher side of current society. So, in order to reject the modern man and his lifestyle, Tsukasa rejects science in all aspects and comes to represent the concept of the past. Tsukasa also represents the past, not through just his ideals and the concepts he used, but through minor aspects as well. He adorns himself in primitive clothes such as simple wraps and animal furs, and carries no weaponry. His hair is long, wavy, and tied at the ends, each of these evoking the image of a man from time past. Tsukasa relies on his brute strength alone. His views on humanity are interesting as well, as there is a philosophical side to him. Tsukasa wants to avoid the malice that humanity reached, embodying an anarcho-primitive mindset with the empire he builds. In this subset of ideology, we see Tsukasa reject the modern ways of man out of a place of pain and trauma. Having been wronged by those who are considered better than him with no real reason for their status, throwing him and his sister aside, the previous modern society forced Tsukasa to cultivate his strength in order to provide for his sister. Now, with that same strength and revival of those who are young and viable, he aimed to usher in a new era for mankind. Clearly, this ideology does not thrive when met with the wit of Senku and the allies he would form. Tsukasa and Senku slowly culminate their own strategies and form bonds that would clash during the Stone Wars. Once Senku triumphs, with help from the villagers of Ishigami Village and a freshly revived Gen Asagiri, Tsukasa relents and sees eye to eye with him. This turn represents the first touchstones of man and science making progress in the world, as with the now combined forces of the Tsukasa Empire and Ishigami Village, Senku is able to forge the path to even higher possibility. The combination of brawn and brains bring forth many fast changes to the Stone World, such as better travel capability and communication. The next landmark of the past shows itself in the form of Treasure Island and those who stand against Senku and his group. When the gang arrive, they find another society that is formed akin to the one within Ishigami Village. On this island, the villagers live in a brutal society with access to what becomes known as the Medusa, an elusive device capable of petrification. The same device that was responsible for the main event that kicked the series off. The foes of Treasure Island are the second and last to parallel the past era for humanity. They are more advanced than the approach that Tsukasa took, as many of the islanders have training and access to things that the Science Gang does not. This portrays the similar advancement of mankind, where humans began to experiment with their surroundings and create massive civilizations. Cohabitation and focus on communal growth. By standing together and training under the same methods, the soldiers of Treasure Island see a bond that is stronger than that of Tsukasa's primitive group. They also serve as the opposite to those who live in Ishigami Village, both branching from the same ancestors. One civilization aimed to advance in primitive ways, living with the land, while the others grew and built up their surroundings. The structures found on Treasure Island are impressive, boasting large villages and bridges. The inhabitants have a harsh way of life, focusing on strength and brutality. Conversely, there is Ishigami Village, which holds a more communal focus. There is a strong emphasis on family and bringing one another up. Ishigami Village is also unafraid of advancement in regard to science, as Crone was experimenting long before Senku had made his arrival. Due to the enemies of Treasure Island being more evolved, this creates higher tension for the crew, and even higher stakes. The warriors Mose and Kirisame both have excellent physical builds and training, which allowed them to hold an upper hand on most of the science crew. Their leader, Ibara, is a sinister figure who poses the biggest threat with access to the Medusa. Ibara ruled over Treasure Island as a dictator, featuring another avenue of rule that humanity is capable of. Ibara's aims to rule over the island and lay claim to whatever he pleases is another opposite to the inhabitants of Ishigami Village. Where the villagers of Ishigami Village carried their business in a more fair way through equal shows of strength and physical capability, Ibara rose to power through cheating and quick wits. Ultimately, the win goes to Senku and company, as they make off with the supplies needed for more revival fluid, as well as new allies in tow. The dictator Ibara is overthrown, with rule being properly mitigated among the people. These opponents called to the past of humanity with their advancements in ideology and capability, growing past the anarchistic ideals of Tsukasa. However, their lack of modern thinking and brutish ways led to their downfall. Through using modern technology and thought, Senku was able to claim victory. But the path to his victory was not only found through himself, but also the allies he has made. After retrieving the supplies necessary for more revival fluid and countering the foes of the island, the Kingdom of Science is able to find some downtime, eventually making their way to the United States in search of more resources for science. Here in the United States, the threat of the modern day looms overhead. Dr. Zeno Houston Wingfield, a former scientist for NASA, found himself awakening the same time that Senku did. Upon rising, Zeno got right to work on trying to form a society of his own. Using his masterful intellect, he began to build himself a crew of those he had worked with prior to the petrification. Among their ranks is Stanley Snyder, a military sniper with expert precision who works as Zeno's right-hand man. Zeno began rebuilding the world as well as he could with the tools that he had. Notably, he built a plethora of vehicles and weapons for self-defense. Guns, planes, and even a submarine. All of these commodities would only be possible in the current modern time. Zeno goes further to embody this modern man with the method that he conducts himself, always pulling at the strings while keeping himself hidden away. His design being one of the more standout among the antagonists, as he dons a dark and nefarious trench coat, along with long, claw-like nails that allow him to closely examine his tools. The dark X across his forehead marks him as especially shady, paired with the dark circles / eyeliner that he has. These design elements contrast that of Senku, who wears mostly light and beige colors and has a brighter complexion. The petrification marks of Zeno extend upwards, with Senku stretching downward. These choices all being elegantly made by the pair writing the manga to further the divergence between these two. But, highlighting their ties, as Zeno once mentored Senku prior to the petrification, now standing as the biggest foe he has encountered. The dynamic of Senku and Zeno goes deeper than previous foes, thanks to the bonds they've shared, but also the divide in their ideology. Senku wanting to preserve the status quo and revive those who had perished lies in direct contrast to Zeno. Zeno desires a world ran by the best minds that the world has to offer, echoing the ideology of geniocracy. Due to his past as a NASA scientist and his inflated ego, Zeno supports this idea and does anything he can to achieve it. Even going as far as having his American colony track the Senku gang as they leave the United States with him as a hostage, and ensuring that they won't get in his way again. Much like the modern man, Zeno is cunning and merciless in his pursuits, employing all cards that he has while generating new ideas still. The use of his tools and science set the precedent for modernity. The use of tools and science set the precedent for modernity, and current times as well. Zeno is able to make use of his trained men and navigate most of what Senku throws at him. However, much like the other forces that Senku is faced off with, eventually Zeno and his allies are defeated, marking another win for the Kingdom of Science, and leaving only one more period left uncovered. The future. The open possibility of what the future holds and what we conceptualize with our modern minds. Space travel, flying cars, and robots. Nearing the end of their journey through the Stone World, Senku and company set their sights on finally approaching the Y-Man. This Y-Man having been elusive and ever-present since early on within the story, ominously sending broadcasts and even trying to petrify the gang with remote voice samples. Embarking on their biggest set of checklists yet, the unified forces of Senku, Zeno, and the other brilliant minds that have tagged along, the next step is space. Flying a spacecraft to the moon and finding the source of the signals sent by the Y-Man. This last hurdle is especially daunting, as space travel is more precarious than any other challenge yet. Everything must be precise down to the smallest digit, and each piece must be in place. Anything less would result in utter catastrophe. During this last stretch of time, a lot occurs in terms of approaching this final mysterious foe. Each and every member of the large society plays a part in the mission, aiming to end the threat of ever being petrified again. Once the final task is complete, the combined group of Senku, Kohaku, and Stanley set off for the moon. Last check for spoilers, as this contains some endgame stuff. If you want to skip this, here's your warning now. Reaching the moon leaves our players in a state of tension, doing what was once thought to be impossible in such a short span of time. But also the anxiety of facing that final boss, not knowing what lays in wait for them. The tension creeping up on both the characters in the story and the readers who are following it. As we soon find out, the Y-Man has been in front of our faces the entire time. Since the beginning. The Y-Man was the future. The Y-Man was the Medusa devices. Sentient machine life forms in search of species that are intelligent enough to create eternal life for them. Shown previously, the devices are run on a battery, which eventually will run out. Eternal life being an ultimate goal for these alien life forms, they petrified all of humanity in order to examine what they would do, but also provide them eternal life as well. When shown that humanity would find a way to combat this eternal life, the devices grew confused and frustrated, wondering why anything would reject the gift of what is essentially eternal life, as the humans who would have been petrified would never die, leading them to ask, why? The magnificence in the writing is shown here by displaying a truly alien mindset. These devices cannot comprehend why anything would reject their gift, while also assuming that humanity, at a glance, is vastly more intelligent than they are. Of course, as we see through the manga, humanity is capable of amazing things, which is why the heroes are able to get to the moon at all. However, this does not live to the standards of a futuristic and self-replicating machine. A hive mind of technological thought, demonstrating what can be described as truly futuristic. The Y-Man stands as the last foe of Dr. Stone. Pivoting from the previous subject of arrows, Dr. Stone exemplifies another concept excellently within its many pages. The human spirit. The drive to strive onward despite your limitations and face adversity with a strong attitude. Compared to manga that feature protagonists and casts that light up panels with feats of superhuman strength and durability, Dr. Stone is a much more grounded story. Outside of its science fiction-inspired beats, the story takes place in a world no different than the real one. Humans in this world are fragile. They'll die if they suffer enough damage. They can get sick, and they experience a wide array of emotions. The most prevalent example of the human spirit can be found within the protagonist, Senku. From when we first see him emerge from his stone prison to the end of the story, Senku strives to do his absolute best in the face of hard times. He has times of doubt and difficulty, but he ultimately never gives up, pushing himself to focus on the task at hand, whether that be finding himself a suitable shelter from outside forces or coming up with a plan to stop a ferocious opponent. Senku also has a heart of gold despite seeming cold on the outside. He deeply cares for those around him, and even will go out of his way to protect them if he can. Gifting Gen the cola, making glasses for Suika, and entertaining the various ideas of others demonstrate his altruistic nature. His ultimate goal of restoring the population that existed pre-petrification shows how far his noble character goes. This also helps him stand against his varied foes, who all contrast from him in this thought process and aim to reshape the world in their own vision. Narratively speaking, why Senku is the man he is comes from a rather interesting point. In an interview with the creators of the manga, Inagaki has this to say. In today's entertainment landscape, there's a lot of Supermans and superheroes, and they can do everything. But in reality, most people are not like that. I thought about the average person. For the average person to accomplish something, you need to keep working and build up towards whatever your goal is. In order to capture this, Dr. Stone operates in a world with real-world obstacles and real-world people. As I mentioned earlier, it is a world with people no different than the very readers, typical everyday men and women. Moving back to Senku, his humanity is also seen through his imperfections. Senku is of a rather average height and is physically very weak. To compensate for this, he is able to react incredibly fast and come up with solutions in a flash. He is also a diplomatic person and tries to find common ground with his detractors. Despite being a certified genius and having an immaculate memory, Senku is still just human. Just because he has the know-how does not mean he will always succeed. Where he fails, others are also there to pick up the slack. The community of Dr. Stone stand to the challenges they face and work together despite their differences. The core group of characters all have different strengths and weaknesses that allow them to work together to achieve their goals. Right from the get-go, the team of Senku and Taiju were able to accomplish the mere act of surviving in the brutal new world due to their combined brains and brawn. The manipulative cunning of Gen and quick thinking of Senku has also gotten the crew out of many dire situations. Each character brings their own ability to the table, and this lets them survive and work against the Stone World. As far as story goes, it feels natural that these characters have come together, bouncing off one another narratively. This very world acts as an opponent of its own. The characters who are resurrected from petrification have to contend with an unfamiliar world, essentially resetting human impact to the Stone Age. The narrative does a good job at depicting this struggle too, as we see many characters experience a plethora of emotions to their new surroundings. Some adapt quicker than others, but all of them eventually muster the courage needed to advance. The strength of the human mind pushes them forward to fight the petrification and shape their fate, whether it be through the lens of the protagonist Senku, the side characters such as Ryusui and Gen, or even the villains. Each find their reason and will to carve their way out of the past and into the future. As for those who were born into this world, such as those who lived on Treasure Island and the more prevalent cast of Ishigami Village, there is also that same sense of human persistence. The sheer fact that the astronauts who landed to Earth and reproduced allowed for future generations of humanity to come is a testament to this theme, but it is furthered by the fact that these societies continued on. Ishigami Village touts some of the more complex characters, such as Chrome, Kohaku, and Suika, who all grew within this stone world and all have their own goals. Chrome aspiring to further the village with his inventive mind, eventually becoming a student of Senku. Kohaku fighting to prolong her sister's life in any way that she can, and dedicating herself to physical strength to protect not just herself, but the village at large. And Suika, who grows from a kind and naive child to a key member of the science crew, playing a large part multiple times in the story. Each character who joins the fray and sides with Senku feels natural, as well as bringing their own unique talents and personality to the table. Whether they're hailing from the stone world with the characters I've mentioned a minute ago, or the resurrected ones such as Gen, Ryusui, and Taiju, all have their place. Due to their combined enemy being the very world that they live in, they put their faith in each other and pursue the goal of returning to the past. During scenes where Senku proposes a new project and puts it into action, all of the characters have a place and purpose. No tool is left in the shed here, which makes the story stronger, but also shows their determination and spirit. Culminating in landmark scientific achievements that get passively mentioned through the story, such as the cell phone that Taiju clamors for, the video games that Sai missed playing as a kid, and even the space travel that Senku longed for since he was a boy. Taking a step back from the theme of the human spirit, let's look at the connecting fiber of the story. The singular thing that brings everyone together in the world of Dr. Stone. Science. Acting as a unifying force within the story, it drives the plot as well as bringing the cast together. Dr. Stone shows that no matter how smart you are, you can still be a part of science. Right from the very beginning, we see science as the thread that pulls Dr. Stone together, as it opens with Senku in the lab working on a project. Prior to the world being petrified, through flashbacks, we are shown that Senku has been an avid scientist his entire life. Not just this, but he has had many different aides such as Taiju, his father, and even Dr. Zeno. Using his extensive knowledge, Senku had his altruistic nature even in his youth, as he aimed to make the world a better place. Once he is thrown into the disaster of the Stone World, he gets right to work applying his scientific knowledge, figuring out how to undo the petrification, as well as how to survive on his own with the tools that he has. After he has this worked out, Senku looks to the future and tries to return to what the world was. Through the usage of science, we see the plot take off as Senku and his eventual crew build the world up from scratch. Starting on a smaller scale with rafts, gunpowder, and pulleys, to the amazing modern technology of cell phones, television, and spacecraft. For the readers of the series, it's impressive to see these projects grow, but to also understand them, the Senku will often lay out the blueprints and steps needed. Bonus points for the character of Senku Bot, who jumps in to remind the readers of possible dangers that some of these projects have. As stated before, science is not just something that Senku involves himself in, but rather it works to bring the characters of the story together too. The same way their combined attitudes and spirits towards surviving the stone world push them to carry on, science is the vessel through which they're able to do just that. Returning the world to the way it was and triumphing over the mysterious Y-Man are the two biggest goals of Dr. Stone, and we see the characters slowly approach this with their applications of science. Some characters, such as Taiju and Gen, have little understanding of what is involved with the science behind their tasks, but are still focused on doing what they can to contribute. Additionally, we see the opponents of Senku employ science to different degrees outside of Tsukasa. Each opponent is knowledgeable with science to one degree or another, and this helps create tension within the story. The same way a battle series may have the opponents have a greater set of skills and powers, Dr. Stone displays the playing field with applications of science. Ibarra using the Medusa devices and cunning to pull one over on the Senku gang, and Zeno using many modern commodities generate unique conflicts to be dealt with. As said by Tsukasa, towards the end of the story, reflecting on the skills between him and Kohaku, science is the great equalizer. And the story works to make that abundantly clear. In times where there may be a wall, Senku and the others find a solution to the problem, chipping away at that wall as opposed to toppling it all at once. And while the story doesn't have many cases of battling, there are still conflicts that require quick thinking and fast action. Electrifying his fingers against the threat of Hyoga, or outwitting Ibarra on Treasure Island with the use of a speaker. Science is the catalyst for these victories, allowing our heroes to see another day and break through to the future. By the end of Dr. Stone, we see the goals of the cast being achieved through science. One last check for spoilers, as we're going to talk about the ending real quick. As the world has advanced, we see Taiju and Yuzuriha finally getting married, just as he set out to do when the story began. Modern technology is widespread, such as buildings, all forms of travel, and so on. With the final chapters closing, Senku tells Gen that he's working on a time machine with the help of the Medusa device in order to save the world's population in full, just as he set out to do in the beginning. This serves to not only showcase how far science has brought the gang, but also that science is a never-ending pursuit. Science is ever-evolving, and with access to futuristic technology, Senku once again aims for the impossible, just as he always had. As we reach our conclusion, I'd like to reiterate that Dr. Stone is just that good, and honestly worth a read if you aren't already a fan. The concepts Inagaki uses and how he uses them truly set it apart from other manga, as well as Boichi's gorgeous art. Some of the paneling and spreads within Dr. Stone have had me sit there just staring at how pretty they are. Not to get too personal though, as I normally try to be informative, but especially now that it's finished, give it a read or even start the anime. As Senku always says, it's 10 billion% worth it. Now that we're at the real end, I just want to thank you guys if you've made it to the end, or even just for clicking on the video. Really appreciate all the support I've been getting so far, and, hopefully we can keep going from where we're at. I've got a couple things I'm working on, so hopefully we'll be seeing a bit more consistency in uploads. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, hit like, subscribe,